Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kimberly Schreiner with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. You have signed on to be part of the Acres for America 2020 webinar, and we're just going to wait about 2 or 3 more minutes to give more people time to log in. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions box, or if you have any concerns with your ability to see something, you can put it also in the chat box. I'll be monitoring those 2 boxes right now and then throughout the entire presentation. So we're just going to hold tight for a little bit longer and we'll begin shortly. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're going to get started with the webinar. We're just giving people a little bit of extra time to deal with any connectivity issues they may have. My name is Chris West. I'm the Rocky Mountain Regional Director for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, in addition to the duties of delivering programmatic grants and overseeing our programs in the Rocky Mountain region. I am also the project lead for the Acres for America program. I am joined today by Kimberly Schreiner, who is based in our Washington, D.C. office. Kimberly has been our coordinator for this program for the past 6 or 7 years and is actually running the webinar today from her home in Virginia. I'm also joined by Jeff Constance, who is our grants administrator for the Acres for America program, who is going to present on some of the logistics around the Easy Grant system and preparing an application. And Jeff is joining us from his home in Virginia. So I think we are all today working in different circumstances, and so I'm going to apologize in advance for any children, dogs, or roommates that may interrupt any parts of this presentation. So I think everybody's knows what we're all dealing with, and I appreciate everybody joining us today. So Kimberly, if we can go to the next slide, I think we're gonna just jump into this here. Great, so just a couple of things. I think everybody on this webinar should be muted already, but please just make sure that your phone is muted in any event. We don't want to mess this up for everybody. And please don't put us on hold. We've had that be an issue in some previous webinars in the past. If you do have a question during this, which we thoroughly encourage, and we're going to stop a couple of times, one at the about halfway through after we describe the program and what we're looking for, and then also again at the end after Jeff has had an opportunity to describe the application process or the nuts and bolts of how our Easy Grant system works. We will stop and answer questions. So please type those into the question box on the control panel. Kimberly is monitoring that, and when we get to those points, she will be reading those questions to the group so everybody can hear your question. If you have a problem, please put kind of a technical or logistical problem, please put that into the chat box, and Kimberly is monitoring that as well. Again, we are going to be recording this. We are recording this webinar, and that will be posted eventually soon on our website. But there's also a tip sheet that can be found for applications and covers many of the same topics that we'll cover today. That also can be found on the Acres for America program page on the NFWF website. So I'm going to go to the next one. All right, so just for those who are watching us who may not know a little bit about the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we are a 501c3 nonprofit foundation dedicated to conserving and restoring our nation's native fish and wildlife and the habitats on which they rely. Easy to say, it's all right there. I think a couple of the things that make us somewhat different than a typical foundation is that we were chartered by Congress through an act in 1984, and our board is a 30-member board of 28 citizens appointed by the Secretary of the Interior, and then as well standing positions for the Fish and Wildlife Service Director and the Administrator of NOAA. The key things of how we do our work is the combination of public funding and private money. This program that we're talking about today, the Acres for America, really is leaning towards that private funding, but really all of our focus as a foundation is focused towards getting on the ground projects completed through a competitive grant making process. Okay. The next one, great. And this is really a sort of a visual representation of that model of combining non-federal partners and federal partner resources that are derived through a variety of sources. Today's webinar, the Acres for America program, is focused on a corporate partner, Walmart, and we have had a long-standing relationship with them. But many of the projects that we have funded, in fact, most of the projects that we have funded over the life of this program have a public funding component with them that may or may not be, often is not through NFWF directly, but is a huge component of many land conservation projects. So this fits with our way of business operations and our business model. Let's go to the next one. There are a couple of these slides that are in here really talking about the breadth of partnerships that we bring to the table, from private philanthropy, corporate world, and federal agencies. So pick your favorite logo and favorite corporation or public agency, and we have likely worked with them in one capacity or another over the past 35 years. So specifically talking about Walmart's Acres for America program, this is we are entering our 15th year of our partnership with Walmart. It was launched in 2005 as a way for Walmart to begin to address some of their interest in conserving land across the country and working with multiple partners through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to achieve those goals. So the next, over the last 15 years, oh, no, you can go to the next one, Kimberly, sorry. What we've really looked to do through this program, and this is through this long-standing partnership, and these priorities and objectives of the program really have remained relatively unchanged over the last 15 years, but focusing on conserving critical habitat for bird, fish, plants, and wildlife, really looking at protecting the best of the best that is out there across the United States. Looking also at the idea of connectivity and connecting existing protected lands to unify landscapes, wild places, and protecting things like migration routes for wildlife. The last two bullets are equally important to provide access for people to enjoy the outdoors. There are probably a little over half of the projects involve significant amounts of public access and allowing or expanding people's ability to connect with natural places. And then furthermore, to ensure the future of local economies that depend on forestry, ranching, and wildlife. So working lands are a significant component of this project, of this program, I'm sorry, and many of our projects reflect that. And we'll go into some examples later that kind of talk about some of these priorities and how these are manifested or how they show in different land conservation projects. You go to the next one. So the initial goal of the program was to offset Walmart's domestic development footprint back in 2005, which was about 100,000 acres. Since that time, through the last year's grant slate, the Acres for America grants contributed to the protection of more than 1.49 million acres. So we've been wildly successful in meeting our initial goal. We've done this through 94 projects in 40 different states, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, working with well over 100 partners to do so. So this has really been something that we're proud of in the portfolio of projects that have been completed through this. I think you're going to be shown here on the next slide with a map showing kind of where these projects are located across the U.S. So this is really, like you said, it's Acres for America. We have projects in 40 of the states. We would love over time to get to having a project in every state in the country, but really also showing that we have a number of coastal projects. We have projects in eastern forests. We have projects around the Great Lakes, in the Rockies, and in the Pacific Coast, as well as in Alaska and Hawaii. So this is a project that really reflects the best of the best of American land conservation opportunities. Go to the next one, Kimberly. So, and then we mentioned the partnerships. So there are really a whole number of not only the grant recipients, but also the partners who are involved in these different projects. We'll go through 4 of the more recent projects, but there are states, there are nonprofit, there are land trusts, there are wildlife-based organizations, there are federal agencies that have been involved in a number of these projects, really representing all what we can do. I think the average project would either have, probably the majority of projects, I'll put it this way, has gone to either a land trust or a land conservation organization, nonprofit, or to a state agency, generally led by the state wildlife agencies tend to be typical recipients of Acres for America grants. Go to the next one. Okay, so jumping into this 2020 opportunity, for those of you who've seen this, obviously, or hopefully you know that the request for proposals was posted on our website about 2 weeks ago. This has been obviously a completely different 2 weeks for the country, and so if people haven't missed it, please go take a look at the full request for proposals on the NIPWIF website. This year, we're expecting to have about $3.1 million available, and as has been the case for this program for the last several years, we are anticipating making between 6 and 8 grants this year. And we do have a number of criteria, which I'll dive into here, but we really do want to make sure that the Acres for America program stays true to that programmatic focus, and I can dive into those. Maybe just jump to that right now, Kimberly. These criteria. So before I dive into what each of these mean, I'll expand on each one to some degree. I think it's also important to know that we do not expect that every project will have a 100% alignment with every one of these bullets. We are really looking to, if there's a project that has the best place for a single species, or it has an incredible opportunity for public access to nature, or connecting to already protected areas in a landscape, those are the kind of things that we would really like to understand. What makes any specific project superlative in any of these criteria. So just jumping into this, the criteria, and this top one really does capture often many of the following criteria as well, but protect or contribute to the protection of significant areas of land and address one or more of these priorities. But really this national and state conservation priority is something that we rely pretty heavily on and really look to. But a lot of states, a lot of organizations and agencies have put enormous amounts of effort into conservation planning and understanding where opportunity lies within their landscape, and being able to explain why those priorities or how those priorities were arrived at. So if your project falls into, I'll pick on the state of Pennsylvania today, or the state of Maine, for instance. If the state of Maine has decided that a specific habitat type and a specific region of the state is the highest priority, and lists out all of the criteria that they used to determine why this is the most important in their state, that is the kind of prioritization models that we like to look at. We also would look at things like North American Wetlands Conservation Act information, where there's been some significant planning going on around those, or any other plan that really delves at things at the state or national level. And those are the kind of projects that we will kind of naturally gravitate towards here. As a part of that, obviously, those are all generally wildlife-driven plans. We really do want to be sure that we are protecting and contributing to projects that protect critical fish and wildlife species and the habitats that they require for their at least a part of their life cycle. Another one that's a little bit trickier, and we do rely on each individual applicant to be able to tell us through the narrative in the application what's most important to them, is this idea of connectivity across landscapes, and how a property really plays into the larger landscape in which it sits, and how the protection of a specific property is very important to the local that landscape and the properties that sit in adjacent to it and in immediate context to it. Expanding public access to nature is something that often goes hand in hand with land conservation, not always, but we also look to projects that have the ability to get people out onto the land or on a river, that allows them to make those connections with the natural world. We do understand that public access is not always compatible with species conservation, is not always compatible with working lands landscapes, and so this is not a requirement, but it's something that if it exists, we do want to know about it. If it doesn't exist, we do want our applicants to say that this is an absolutely amazing project, for instance, but in this case, public access is only going to be allowed on a small portion of it, or won't be allowed on it, and here is why. So we understand that. turning in large to the working lands component of this, we also understand that activities like sustainable timber harvest, like ranching, can provide huge benefits to local economies, and the idea of both those natural resource-based economies as well as recreation, which is often based on access to those properties, can have great benefits to local economies. We do want to know about that and understand how the conservation of this project will contribute to the local economic activity. And we're increasingly looking at things such as carbon and the ability of these projects to provide watershed protection, water quality benefits to communities and to people in the local area. So the idea of this ecological services is something that we do also want to know about as we review the project applications. And then this last bullet is something that we have always taken into consideration, but we in the last year have gotten a little bit more explicit about the understanding the threat of conversion. What stands in front of this property? But for the conservation of the property, what would happen in this landscape, and why and how imminent is that threat of conversion, and how would that be something that's negative to the conservation priorities, the wildlife species on that property that exists there or could exist there in the future. So we're going to ask applicants to be a little bit more explicit around the threat of conversion and explaining not only how imminent that is, but what it would be converted to, or what those threats represent for wildlife or for recreational access or connectivity in that landscape. And that's going to be very different in each part of the country. We understand that, but we do just want to make sure that we explicitly ask our applicants to provide that information as part of their proposal. So I'll take a quick break there. Kimberly, go to the next one. Okay. So as we additional parts of our application, this is a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of it. Is we do want to see what a shapefile delineating where the property is. It's very difficult for us looking at a whole country to be a subject matter expert in what's going on in Florida and in Oregon and in Louisiana all at the same time. So any information you can provide as an applicant around maps and delineating where and explaining in your narrative where and how the context of the local landscape is very important. The second bullet, also we also understand that each real estate transaction is very different, and that how this fits into a larger acquisition plan or a larger transaction is something that we definitely want to understand, and really helps give us the context of making an investment into a larger effort or a larger transaction structure. We also do want to know if you're an organization that's looking to buy the land and transfer it over time to a federal agency, to a state wildlife area, to a local open space or local open space district or the like, really understanding not only Land Trust X is going to buy this property, but Land Trust X is going to buy this property. We are going to then raise the money needed for stewardship, endowment, and do all the other things. And then we are actually going to transfer this property to another entity for long-term management or to manage the public access components to it. So really understanding, go back one, understanding kind of how the second and third bullets here really play into each other, really understanding that entire transaction structure. If there's a conservation easement, we would like to know at least the bare bones of what those conservation easement restrictions are in terms of reserved rights for any reserve development or for public access in particular. Those are the two that tend to be the most common that we really do want to understand along with that. And then lastly, we do have put some guidance together in terms of due diligence and what we need in terms of requirements for processing grants that involve acquisition of real property. And those are available on our website. They're not terribly exciting, but we were given receive one of these grants, they're very important to be able to follow, so we all work on the same set of expectations. And then another thing that we take into consideration, this map shows the current map of the foundation's focal landscape. These are the places where we have active conservation programs or where we are making conservation investments around the country. And these are the places that we know well and are very engaged in. And if your project is located within these, I'll circle back to this at the end as well. We have staff that are programmatic leads for each of these landscapes. And so we encourage anybody who is located within the dark green are landscapes that have a business plan associated with it. Those business plans are all posted on the NIFWF website for each of these specific landscapes. The light green are landscapes where we are in the process of developing a program, and that would presumably lead to the development of a business plan over time that would govern our investments and our decision making in those landscapes. So these are places that are of great importance to the foundation. So this is just another thing to take into consideration, and there's a wealth of information found in each of the business plans and each of the program pages around each of these landscapes on the NIFWF website, and I encourage you to dive into those if your project is located within one of these locations. So go to the next one. So another part of the application process is laying out, what you are going to accomplish. Part of our foundation grant making and grant reporting is very focused on project metrics. This is the list of the different metrics that are available as you fill out your application for Acres for America. We do not expect that every project would have every one of these filled out. We only ask that people fill out those that are appropriate. So if you have a conservation easement program, please do not fill out any of the land acquisition metrics. And if you have a fee acquisition, please do not fill out any of the conservation easement metrics, unless you have a mixed project and you have a component that's a fee acquisition and a component that's a conservation easement acquisition, then you could fill that out, but please explain in the narrative why you have done so. So we do understand that this can be a little confusing. A big part of Kimberly's job and my job during the application process is fielding questions, and we're happy to answer, and we often do answer questions around metrics. Some of these are a little trickier. Acres Connected is a little tricky. We've had applicants who have said this is adjacent to a national forest that's 4 million acres, and therefore it's connecting to 4 million acres. Sometimes these metrics can be a little overstated. So really, if you have an exceptionally large number in something like Acres Connected, I would like to understand how you came at that, and that can be done either through the narrative or some of for budget things. For instance, it can be accomplished in some of the budget narrative. But a couple of others that are typically we get a lot of questions on is the economic benefits. Those are kind of inherently difficult to quantify, but just make your best guess at why those are and explain why those numbers were included if you can in your narrative. And public access also is generally we try to have those numbers confined just to the project or the project that we are considering in this. So if there's a 50-mile trail and this is a 1-mile connection on the 50-mile trail that's being secured, please don't put 50 miles of trail access on there. That would be 1 mile of additional trail to public access, and include the significance of that trail and that public access in the project narrative, and not as a 50-mile access metric in here. Happy to answer additional questions. I'm sure there will be some on that, so we will come back to that for sure. The program also has a match requirement of 1-to-1 match in the form of cash, in-kind contributions of goods and services, and or donated land value. Most of our projects have far exceeded this in the history of the Acres for America program. Generally, we're seeing things in between 6 and 10-to-1 match, or have been where most of the successful applications tend to lie. Federal funds may be considered as match, and in fact are really encouraged as matched. All of the funding that is coming through the Walmart Acres for America program is non-federal, and none of it has been matched at all. So this is all wide open funding in terms of developing matching funds from federal sources. We often also see a lot of funding coming from state and local open space or wildlife sources as well. Eligible applicants include nonprofit organizations, state, local, municipal governments, tribes, and educational institutions. We do allow for both fee title acquisitions and perpetual conservation easements. And if there's a perpetual conservation easement, it has to qualify under the definition of conservation purposes under the IRS code 170H. If you want to get into that, that's a whole other ball game, and I'll be happy to talk with any individual applicant about their conservation easement acquisitions. And you'll need to provide all the appropriate documentation around your property and when it gets to the time for closing. Go to the next one. Excuse me. So a little bit about around our process. As I mentioned earlier, the RFP was released a couple of weeks ago, and it will be open until April 15th. We really do encourage applicants to contact the regional office. NIFWF operates 5 different regional offices around the country. There's a direct contact listed for each region in the RFP. I am the lead for the Rocky Mountain region, for instance. So I would, if there's an application that you're considering in your region, please reach out to me to discuss it in advance. It really does help, and we find that about 80% of our successful applicants have had previous conversations with NIFWF staff around their application in advance. The process is a 2-stage process. So the pre-proposal is meant to be a short, quick snapshot of what you are trying to accomplish and where you're doing it and how much funding you are seeking. Those are the pre-proposals that would be due on April 15th. And those are going to have to be submitted through our Easy Grants portal, which Jeff Constance is going to detail for you in a few minutes. We will then take all of the pre-proposals that are submitted and invite a subset of those for full proposals, which involve kind of more detail both on the structure of the transaction and on the finances of the transaction. And those will be the invitations for those will be sent out in mid-May, and the full proposal deadline is June 24th. Final funding decisions are going to be made in the fall by the NIFWF Board of Directors, and we expect to be able to make announcements immediately after that board meeting in October. So I'm going to run through a couple of examples of different successful applications over the last few years. I got 4 of them here that really cover a breadth, and I'll really hit on what made each of these projects stand out. And this is a interesting collection of locations. One of the questions I'm sure we'll get is, are we looking to have a project in every state? And the answer is yes. Another question that we often get is, are we looking to have, if there's been previous grants in my state, does that preclude me from getting from another grant being made? And the answer is no. And I think there are several states, California, Florida, Texas, Montana come to mind, where there have been multiple grants to multiple different projects over time, and we fully expect that that will continue to happen in many different states. So there's really nothing precluding anybody from applying to the program as long as you're located within the United States, and that but we are looking for different projects from all 50 states over the life of the program. So jump into the next one. So just talking about a couple of different ones. The first one is Creamer's Field in Alaska. This is basically within the city limits of Fairbanks, Alaska. It's a large wetland complex and important stopover site for migratory birds, but also a really important community asset in the middle of Alaska's 2nd largest city. And this was a project that also had a clear threat where there was a competing offer for the project to be, or for the project area to be converted to a coal ash dump site, which really would be clearly detrimental to the wildlife values and the community values that are so important on this property. Go to the next one. This is a project from 2019, which the Ballot Ranch, which represents our first investments in the state of Kansas. It was a 9,250 acre working cattle ranch in a highly valuable ecosystem of the Red Hills of southern Kansas. It protected the ranch from fragmentation and from really conversions. That was one of the big threats here of grassland conversion in the Great Plains. And not only did it have the working lands component, but this one had that combination of wildlife values as well as the value for the working landscape and the grassland habitats that exist there. Go to the next one. This project, the Canoochee Sandhills in Georgia, recently closed. This closed within the last few months, and it was awarded, I believe, in 2018, but led to the permanent protection by the state of Georgia of 6,065 acres, which was really critical to the part of a larger effort in that state to protect species that are tied to longleaf pine, in particular the gopher tortoise, and a number of other red cockaded woodpecker, a number of other species that are tied to longleaf pine habitat. This property is going to be open to the public in short order, and it's going to be run as a wildlife management area by the state of Georgia Department of Natural Resources, who's been a longtime partner of ours, and just a great example of partnership between a state agency, nonprofit. In this case, the Conservation Fund was the actual recipient of this grant, and NIPWIF. So great project, just another example. And then the last one we wanted to touch on was one that had not only some species benefits around high elevation New England forest species, things like brook trout and Bicknell's thrush to be specific, but also had connectivity as a main driver. This was an in-holding of 2,745 acres in the Green Mountains of southern Vermont, and was a key component of linking the Long Trail and several other highly used recreational assets in that area. This is not far from the ski area of Killington, Vermont, but was really stood out based on its recreational amenities combined with its ability to protect key habitat for threatened and endangered species. So I think that is the four that we were going to highlight here, and I will stop now for a moment and let Kimberly assess some questions that may have come up. I tried to address ones that have come up in the past, but I'm sure there are more.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, we do have a couple questions. The first one is, are federal agencies permitted to compete within the Acres for America RFP and receive a grant?
Yeah, so the answer to that is actually federal agencies are not, but there are many ways that I would encourage, and I'd be happy to have a connection with anybody who is at an agency to find a nonprofit or local partner to be the grant applicant. We have projects all the time. And if you, the one right there that we backed up to here, the Green Mountain project in Vermont, that project was run by a nonprofit that was the actual grant applicant. They amassed the acquisition dollars, and then that property is going to be transferred to the Green Mountain National Forest. So we do have this program has a kind of somewhat unique limitation on federal agencies being the grant recipient, but that does not mean that federal agencies cannot be important parts of the conservation transaction, and honestly can be the long-term management solution or management situation for Acres for America projects. So it's a little bit of a nuanced answer, but I'd be happy to talk with you about any specifics that are related to your particular project.
Thank you. Another question, Chris, is, does match need to be secured at the time of the pre-proposal?
No, That's an easy answer. No, match does not need to be secured. What we are going to want to understand is what the plan is for securing match, what the likely targets are for that match, and what the probability of securing. Is there a history of your organization securing funds from that source? Is there clear alignment with that funding source's priorities and this project, that sort of thing? But no, this money can be either first money in, money right in the middle of your fundraising campaign, or capstone money to put the project over the top. So it can be any of those. Oftentimes, particularly with federal funding, the match does need to be in hand. So we often see that Acres for America funding, particularly with groups, funding sources from the NRCS in particular, are used as match to secure ASEP AL or other NRCS grant programs, for instance. So longer explanation, the answer is no, match does not need to be secured.
Okay. Next question is, does the project need to have already identified a specific parcel, or could it fund the pre-acquisition work associated with a large conservation initiative targeting multiple conservation easements across a landscape?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. We've seen both. I would say that it's significantly or somewhat easier to what we would be buying into if a specific parcel has been identified. For those projects where you're looking at a landscape and where you may have 7 or 8 acquisition targets, we would just need to understand kind of the scope of the entirety of the program, and how, if a grant were awarded, the applicant would proceed to choose different projects or prioritize their opportunities. So we can do it on those larger multi-parcel efforts, and those oftentimes lead to the large scale of projects that we're looking to be a part of in this program. But we do, to be able to, for us to make an informed decision, we do need to have that understanding of the greater vision and the probability of and timeline for that vision to occur.
Okay, I have a couple questions regarding significant acreage. Some states, such as Massachusetts, 1,000 acres is considered significant project size. Would that be considered competitive within Acres for America program?
Yeah, and this is a question that is great, because we talk about the parcel being of significant size for the landscape in which it is located, which is the best we could do to say, to really get at the question you're at. 1,000 acres in Massachusetts is a really, really significant sized parcel. 1,000 acres in a state like Montana is kind of below average. So we do recognize that, and I think part of the not only the acreage size does come into play, but part of it, if you're in a place where your average parcel size is smaller than maybe the average grant has been for this program. If you're on the East Coast, this is something that we need you as an applicant to be able to explain, like, not only what's the why is 1,000 acres in Massachusetts significant, but why is this particular 1,000 acres in Massachusetts of great significance. I think it's entirely possible that you could have 1,000 acres that was the single most important property in the state of Montana, but that might even be a higher bar to overcome at that point, just because we recognize that would be a parcel that's located in a landscape that has generally larger property sizes.
And working from that, Chris, we have a question regarding a potential project that's 200 acres in a suburban area, and whether or not that would be applicable for this program.
I think it would be applicable. The key there is going to be understanding the ecological importance, and then the threat of conversion. Sometimes the suburban parcels do face an uphill battle just because they're probably expensive, and they may have maybe less species value than some larger parcels in other parts of the country. I think that'd be an example where I would encourage you to reach out to the regional lead and see if it falls within some of the other priorities of the foundation's work, and other, kind of understanding the context within the state or region that it's located. Kind of in general, I would say it's possible, but it's going to have to going to have to really shine in some other aspects to be really competitive within the program.
Okay, question regarding the NIFWIF focal landscape map. People are wondering if the application or if the parcel of land must fall within those focal landscapes, and if there is a difference between the importance of in-progress landscapes versus established. Can you give a little more detail regarding that?
You can flip back, Kimberly, to that while I talk. It might make it. The short answer is no, it does not matter. That the project does not have to be within one of our focal landscapes. It's simply something that I pointed out, that these are the places that where NIFWIF is working in greater detail and in greater depth, and places where there may be some alignment with our other programmatic goals. So the answer is no. And actually in 2019, I believe that none of the projects actually, except for possibly maybe one of the 6 projects actually fell within there was a project in Oregon that fell within our Klamath Basin area, but most of the other projects in 2019 did not. So we've had years where 5 of the 6 or 6 of the 8 projects have fallen within these focal landscapes, but other years that has been the opposite. I think it's just saying that these are places that are important, and also it's also an opportunity where if you have a project that may not be a great fit for an Acres for America project, or may not be successful in getting an Acres for America grant, you may have other opportunities within the foundation through these either existing or in progress landscapes. I think the big difference between the 2 different colors just is if we have a business plan that's guiding our investments there or not. And oftentimes those business plans can give you as an applicant great insight as to what's important programmatically to the foundation in those different locations.
And I just wanted to note on this map, some of you might see a 3rd color. The dots of light green are all the projects that NIFWIF has issued over the past decades. So if you're seeing multiple colors and the key is not showing it, that's what those are, our project dots.
That's a great point. Thanks for pointing that out, Kimberly. And you can see there that we often make investments that are not within those. And you can also see that we make an enormous number of grants in the Mid-Atlantic area, in the Chesapeake and the Delaware River Basin. So the places where we've made a lot of grants over time, had long-standing programs, and made a number of multiple grants to multiple organizations over many years in those locations, and that's showing there pretty evidently.
Okay. Can you elaborate on what you mean by ecological services in the program criteria?
Yeah, and that's sort of
and how an applicant would communicate that.
Yeah, that's sort of a catch-all, to be honest with you. We're looking at things, carbon sequestration, water quality for downstream communities, those type of things. It was sort of a catch-all part of the application where we don't know the variety of different services that may be provided that a property may provide to a local community, but we wanted to make sure that we called it out and that we were able to give applicants the opportunity to expand upon that in the application if those opportunities exist. If you've got a young early successional forest that's actively sequestering large amounts of carbon, if you are protecting a community drinking water source, those are the type of things that we would just like for you to focus on in the application. And that was sort of our opportunity to prompt those kind of responses.
Had a couple of questions regarding the award funds. First one is, how long does an applicant have to spend the award funds? Should they be issued them? Sure.
We want projects to be, we do want projects to be ripe and ready to go. So we typically would like to see projects spend those funds within 18 to 24 months of grant award, so a year and a half to 2 years. We do understand if we're looking at being catalytic or first money in on a project, that it's going to take longer for those projects to come to fruition than if we're looking at a grant that's a capstone grant that there's the last money needed to get to closing. So we understand that, but I think that generally within 2 years is a good rule of thumb for what we're looking for to get the money on the ground.
What is the typical grant size, and is there a maximum or a minimum that should be asked?
Okay, I would say the typical grant size ranges between $250,000 and $750,000. Like I said, we want to make generally in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 grants a year. There is no minimum or maximum. We leave that up to the entities. But I don't think we've only made a handful of grants of $1 million or more in the history of the program. So most of them have been less than $1 million.
Okay. Could you please elaborate on what the NIFWIF grant award could go towards? For instance, purchase price or attorney fees, et cetera.
Yeah, so this one we really do want to focus the grant award towards the purchase price or of either an easement or a fee acquisition. All of the associated costs, attorney fees, due diligence items, those kind of things can certainly be counted as match. We would greatly prefer to have all of the funding go towards the acquisition in this case under this program.
Can funds be used to purchase conservation easements from municipalities?
Yes, I don't know. There's no prohibition on who we would purchase it from. I think we would just, again, purchasing it from a municipality would need to be explained what the circumstances are around the transaction and what the threat would be should the property not be acquired from that entity.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I think that is many of the questions that work for right now, and some of the questions that have not been answered yet will most likely be answered in the next section of this presentation.
Okay, so let's turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thanks for that, Chris. So my slides will probably not be as pretty as Chris's, and I'll try not to bore you, but I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts about how to actually apply for this funding opportunity. So Easy Grants is the database that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation uses for grant submission and management. If you haven't used this system before, you're going to need to register. And to register, you go to easygrants.nfwf.org and click the blue hyperlink labeled New User. The website will take you to a page that asks for registration information, such as your name and email address. And after you submit this information, your account will be created for you and you'll be able to log in. If you have used Easy Grants before, you can simply log in using your existing ID and password. And if you've lost your password, you can just click the Forgot Your Password button and you'll receive a set of instructions on how to reset your password from Easy Grants at nfwf.org. And lastly, if you've locked yourself out of your account, you can contact our help desk at easygrants@nfwf.org or 202-595-2497. And that number and email address are available on our website as well.
Hey, Jeff, this is Chris. Just really want to jump in. Do we know if that during the quarantine, whatever situation we're in, is that being manned, or is it better to probably do this through email?
That's a good question. I think
I just don't want to put people to a phone number that it's ringing at somebody's desk that nobody is.
Right.
Hey, Chris, I can answer that. The answer is you will still call that number and you're going to receive an answering machine no matter whether we were in this situation or if it was any other day earlier in the year. So you call the number, leave your message, and that will be then answered in a timely fashion.
There you go. Okay, and now once you've created your account and you're logged into Easy Grants, you can click the tab at the top of the screen labeled Profile, then click on View My Contact Details. From here, you can add an organization affiliation to your account and modify your user information. And the email address and phone number for the help desk are on this slide at the bottom. So yeah, we can go to the, so now that the actual application started, you'll go back to your home page and click the Apply for Funding button, and this will load a page that lists all of NIFWIF's current funding opportunities. You're going to want to select the Acres for America Fall 2020 opportunity and press the Apply button. And once you click the Apply button, a task titled Eligibility Quiz will appear on your home page. Please click that link and answer 3 simple questions, which basically ask if you have the authority from your organization to apply, and it just makes sure that you know what you're applying to. Once you submit the quiz, a pre-proposal task will appear on your homepage. You're going to want to click on that link and the pre-proposal will load for you. And so the screen here shows what it looks like if you're in the pre-proposal task. You'll see it's comprised of 5 major sections that you'll need to complete before submission. You don't need to fill out the sections in any particular order, and you can go back into any section that you need to edit as long as you do that before you officially submit the task. And when a section has the minimum amount of information that Easy Grants needs, a green check mark will appear in the validation summary. You can see that near the bottom of the screen here. And this validation summary is visible on the tabs titled Main and the Review and Submit tab on the left side of the screen. Also, please remember to save often, because you certainly don't want to lose your work. All right, so one of the tabs on the pre-proposal task is called Project Information. It asks for a title, description, abstract, and requested amount. For the title, please try not to name your project something generic like Acres for America proposal. Give it a short descriptive name so that we can distinguish it from the other proposals, and try to also indicate the project's purpose in that title. As for the description, ideally that would be 2 sentences long in most cases. The first sentence should clearly state the main activity. So you can address it, you can state whether it's an easement or an acquisition, or name the property, and the second sentence should state the expected outcome from the investment and its relevance to conservation. Try not to use personal pronouns such as I or we. And after you've entered the description, you'll type up an abstract, which will allow you to provide a more detailed description of your project, including the location, purpose, major activities, target species, specific habitat, outcomes, and partners. And again, try not to use personal pronouns in the abstract as well. The last section in the project information tab allows you to enter the amount of funds that you'd like to receive from NIFWIF. And as Chris mentioned earlier, these funds should be used on the purchase price of the property. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks.
Sure. All right, we can go to the next slide. So after filling out the project information tab, you'll click Save and Continue, and you'll be brought to the Upload section. The two things that you need to complete on the Upload section are the pre-proposal narrative template and the project site map. So to complete the narrative template, click on the hyperlinked text labeled NIFWIF pre-proposal narrative template. Once you click on that, the template will automatically download onto your computer. Once you open the file, you can save it to your computer and work on it at your leisure. When you've completed it, you can upload it back into the EasyGrants system by clicking on the drop-down menu under the blue Uploads banner. From this drop-down menu, select Pre-Proposal Narrative and click the big blue Add Files button. Select the template file from wherever you saved it on your computer and click the big blue Start Upload button. As for filling out the narrative template itself, please be sure to include information on what you're hoping to conserve, how the transaction will be structured, including the full purchase price of the property and other partners involved, what could happen to the property if it's not conserved, and any restrictions. It's important to note that the more conservation criteria that your project addresses, the better. Also, don't worry if you're confused. The pre-proposal stage doesn't include a metric section, but it is a good idea to write about applicable metrics, such as the number of acres restored or acquired, in the narrative. So now that you've uploaded the narrative template, you'll go through a similar process to upload your site map. Please select Project Site Map from the drop-down box and click the Add Files button. In the pre-proposal stage, we ask that you select a PDF version of your map from your computer to upload. The RFP references a shapefile, but the shapefile won't be necessary until the full proposal stage of applications. So once you select the file from your computer, the PDF version file of the map, click the Start Upload button, and if you plan to upload multiple maps, you can do so by repeating this process, but we ask that you upload no more than 3 maps. So now the items that you've uploaded will collect in this Uploads window, and you'll know that your uploads were successful by the message in the status column that reads "Successfully validated and converted file." EasyGrants will give you this for all uploads when they're done successfully, with the exception of financial documents. If you need to submit any financial documents in the full proposal stage, sometimes this message doesn't appear, and that's okay, but that's the one exception to that rule. Otherwise, you should look out for that successfully validated message. So after the upload section comes the match and contribution section. All NIFWIF grants need a minimum of a 1-to-1 match ratio. And because this Acres for America program is so competitive, the higher your match ratio, the better. And as Chris stated before, we'd like to know all sources of match, even if you haven't officially applied yet, but you intend to. That would be great to know. So the more detail you include, the better. And both non-federal and federal match are acceptable, but the funds need to be used within the project's period of performance and be committed directly to the project. And finally, the last tab on the pre-proposal task is the Review and Submit section, which will show you that validation summary that we talked about earlier with the green check marks. If all of the sections have the green check marks, feel free to submit if you're ready. If not, go back to the section with a red X and try to fill in what's missing. And an additional document that we've created for you is the Acres for America tip sheet. This document will guide you through every question that Easy Grants will ask you. I think it's extremely useful, and I highly recommend that you use it to ensure that you provide us with the most accurate information. And you can find this sheet on the Acres for America homepage on the nifwif.org website. And again, if at any point during your application process you need assistance, feel free to reach out to our Easy Grants help desk. And you can also receive Easy Grants help by clicking the blue Help tab on the left side of the screen.
Okay, Chris, thanks, Jeff, for that. And I'm just skimming our questions to see if we have any regarding the pre-proposals before you go into the full proposal stage. And the main question is regarding the maps, and do we have to, or does an applicant have to submit a shapefile during the pre-proposal stage?
So, Kimberly, it's my understanding that the map in the pre-proposal should be a PDF, and that does not have to be a shapefile.
Correct. I agree with you there. The shapefile, just to clarify, the shapefile will not be requested until the full proposal stage. And I know some people have questions on whether or not the full proposal map needs to be an actual shapefile. For instance, some nonprofits do not have access to Esri or an ability to generate shapefiles. So are there any other formats or ways for a map to be generated with an Easy Grant? And Jeff, can you elaborate on the alternative ways that a map can be generated if they don't have a generated shapefile?
Sure. Well, Kimberly, one method that comes to mind is that I know that if you're on the map section of the full task, you can actually draw the map, hand draw it with your mouse, and just try to be as accurate as you can. Kind of free drawing it like that. I know that there's also a pretty helpful tutorial video on our website about using our Easy Grants mapping tool. And you can find that on the For Applicants page at nifwif.org. I think it's about 10 minutes long, but it covers a lot of useful information. But that's one way around it. You can draw it with your mouse.
Okay, great. So we are getting beyond our webinar limit, so we will just proceed with the full proposal and wrap up.
All right, so after NIFRIF's internal review of the pre-proposals, a select few applicants will be invited to submit a full proposal. This invitation will come in the form of an email from easygrants@nifwif.org. When you're ready to fill out your full proposal, log back into your Easy Grants account and click on the hyperlinked full proposal task on your homepage. So now that you're in the full proposal task, this is what it looks like. You'll notice that the list of application sections on the left side of the screen is longer than the pre-proposal. Some of these sections are identical to the pre-proposal, and your old answers will automatically populate here. Please note that you are allowed to edit these fields to make improvements or to reflect any changes in your project from the pre-proposal stage to now. The additional sections that you'll need to complete in this full proposal are the project location, a shapefile map of your proposed land or hand draw it, metrics, the budget, and any permits necessary. You don't need to fill out these sections in any particular order. Just make sure that you're saving frequently And like in the pre-proposal, a green check mark will appear in the validation summary when a section is filled out sufficiently. You can find additional guidance on all of these sections in the Acres for America RFP and tip sheet, which are both on the website. And here on the right side of the screen is a list of all of the required uploads in the full proposal stage. We ask for certain financial documents depending upon the type of your organization. Generally, it's an audit, a 990, statement of litigation, and board of trustees. If you don't have any of these or one of these required documents, you can upload an explanation of why you don't have it on your company's letterhead in place of that required document, and we can pass that along. The process to actually upload these documents is the same as we discussed in the pre-proposal stage. You just select the appropriate document type from the drop-down menu and choose the file from your computer and click the Start Upload button. One big difference here with these financial documents is you'll probably get a message that reads no conversion performed, and that's just fine. It just means that the documents weren't converted into the final PDF of the full proposal. Yeah, so let's move on to the budget section. So it's important to note that grant funds for this ACRES program can only be applied to the property's purchase price. So all you need to fill out here in this budget section is the other direct costs category. You'll enter the number 1 in the quantity field and the total amount that you're requesting from NIFWIF in the unit cost field. And again, that's just the amount that you're requesting from NIFWIF. That doesn't include the total funding strategy. And an additional item that we're requesting you to fill out is the general budget narrative. In the blue notes button at the top of the screen, you'll need to present the entire funding strategy, including the total purchase price, the expected expenses, and sources of revenue for the entire project effort. And again, that's in the notes button at the top of the screen, which isn't shown here. And once again, we highly recommend that you utilize this Acres for America tip sheet. It'll guide you through everything that Easy Grants will ask of you. And it'll make sure that you're giving us the most accurate information. And again, you can find this on the Acres for America homepage at nifwif.org. And lastly, if at any time during your application process you need assistance, feel free to hit that help button on the left side of the screen or contact the Easy Grants help desk. And these are just some general tips. We recommend that if you haven't used Easy Grants before, you create your account today to start that familiarization process as soon as possible. Big thing to note with Easy Grants is it uses a lot of pop-ups, so turn off your internet's pop-ups, especially if you use Internet Explorer. And we do not take into account how close the property is to a Walmart store, so you don't need to mention that in your application. And you should try to discuss your application and your strategy with fellow conservationists and other partners because it's going to be a group effort. So the more people that you've talked to, the better. And again, we encourage you to reach out to your regional staff contact at NIFWIF. The contact names for these people are listed on the RFP. And all applications need to be submitted through Easy Grants. That's the only way that we'll be able to review them. And after about 4 weeks, if your pre-proposal is selected, you'll be invited to submit that full proposal, and the board will make the final funding decision in November.
Okay, Chris, it looks like we have only one question remaining. Thank you, everybody, for staying on past the 1 hour mark. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our Acres for America webpage, as well as a PDF version of it. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed themselves. Chris, the last question we have is, if an applicant has another proposal pending for a different NIFWIF program, will that preclude the person from being considered for the Acres for America?
Short answer is no. If it's for the same project, I would encourage either referencing that. I don't know if you want to reference it in the narrative, but I'd really encourage talking to your regional lead, which will be posted here, which is also on the RFP on the website, just so they can give you some insight as to how that would be best addressed. But having multiple applications open with NIFWIF doesn't preclude anything from happening on either application. So I think
Great, that's it.
Yeah, I'll end really quickly. There's a list here of the regional leads. If I know we're all in a little bit of a different communications world right now. If you're not getting a response, please reach out to either Kimberly or I with your questions. And then also, if you have project, these are the leads who would be probably best suited to understanding the context of your project with other NIFWIF programs in those different landscapes that were shown on that landscapes map. So I think that these are the folks who could really be the most helpful in terms of finding that best fit within our work for your work. So with that, thank you, everybody. I know this has been a little bit of a different way of doing things. Jeff and Kimberly, thank you for your help today, and I look forward to hearing from many of you, certainly those in the Rocky Mountain region, and anybody else who may have specific questions about Acres for America. And that is it. So thanks, everybody. Stay safe and stay healthy.